You see where it says display settings? To the left.
Sir?
There you
Okay.
go, right there. Click that and hit duplicate slideshow or swap, either one.
Bingo. Thank you so much. All right.
I'm here to help.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Joe Rouse, and I am the Managed Lanes and Tolling Statewide Program Manager at Caltrans's Division of Traffic Operations here in headquarters in Sacramento. And I, again, want to welcome you all to today's workshop. As you can see on the slide here, I developed this workshop for the purpose of really trying to educate Caltrans staff, primarily our traffic operations folks, but others as well who are interested, on some of the more technical aspects of tolling on managed lanes. And this was based on discussions that I've had not only with our teams in our districts, but also our regional transportation agency partners who are developing price managed lanes on the state highway system throughout the state. There are certain aspects of tolling related to managed lanes that I think that there was a need, I saw a need for our people, I think, to maybe become more familiar with some of the aspects of it they may not necessarily be familiar with, because we as a department do not develop and operate these facilities on our own. We are looking possibly to go that direction, but as of right now, we do not operate any of them. And so we're not as involved in the day-to-day development and operation of these facilities as some of our regional partners maybe who have the tolling authority. So I felt it would be beneficial to bring someone in to help talk to our people about some of these aspects that we've been discussing over the last, and I've been hearing about from our regional partners over the last several months. So I reached out through LinkedIn to the consulting community to see if there was someone who could help us out. My initial thought was to create a broader roundtable of folks, but the more I thought about it, I figured it'd be better if we just had one person speak to try and to do a more focused presentation that way. But I do want to offer a huge thank you to those of you in the consulting industry who expressed interest when I put out my request. I've got a list here of all the different firms that I've heard from, and I see a number of representatives from these firms are with us today. So thank you for being here. If there's any that I may have missed, I do sincerely apologize. It was not intentional, but I'm really glad that you offered to help out. And I do welcome your participation today. As we have these discussions, have these presentations, you are welcome to offer any additional information that you might feel could be beneficial to the Caltrans team. So I want to talk briefly about what we're going to cover today, really 4 areas. We're going to start with kind of a general overview of the systems and operations associated with tolling, just in general, electronic toll collection specifically. We're going to delve a little bit, not in a lot of detail, about the couple of different types of pricing approaches, namely dynamic versus static. And then we're going to talk in much more technical detail about the application of tolling as a management strategy in and of itself, with a lot of emphasis on trip building and how basically what we're wanting to communicate is how do these prices that you see on these express lanes, how do they get calculated? How do they get posted? What are they reflecting? How does this all work? This will be, I think, the first in maybe a series of workshops just on the topic of price managed lanes. We may have a second workshop that focuses on the project development process for price managed lanes. There are some unique aspects to price managed lanes, specifically the tolling components, that many of our people within Caltrans are probably, they're not used to. And so understanding the roles that system integrators play, where they fit into the project development process, and some of the things that we are seeing as some of these projects get off the ground, some of the things that we're running into, are there things that can be improved? Are there things that can be done differently? I think if we have a general understanding first of the project development process, then we can maybe start to look into some of these issues that we're seeing in a little bit more detail and figure out ways to address those. We're not going to cover those today. Again, that will be a second workshop. I really feel like it's more important today to talk more about the actual application of tolling on price managed lanes. So that's our objective for today. I do want to just let folks know that this will be a bit of a technical presentation. If you're interested in a more general overview of tolling as a whole and a little bit more of a 50,000-foot view of some of these topics that we're going to be discussing today, I would really encourage you to visit the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association's Toll 101 website. And I've got the link here, as you can see on the PowerPoint. It's basically an introduction to tolling, toll principles, and practices. There's a series of about 7 videos, each lasting from about half an hour to a full hour, and they're absolutely free for anyone to access. You just click on that website, and you can start watching whatever video you want, whatever you're interested in. IBTTA, for those of you who may not know, is a worldwide association for the owners and operators of toll facilities and the businesses that serve them. Caltrans is a member of IBTTA, and so as a result, we do get the opportunity to attend IBTTA conferences at a discounted rate, at a government employee rate. And so I would encourage you, visit the IBTTA site, see if there are events that might be of interest to you. And you are welcome, to attend as, your management and your supervisors deem appropriate, follow all appropriate processes for that. But I do want to let you know that IBTTA does have a lot of good learning tools and educational opportunities for people who want to know more about tolling. So I want to put that out there. Particularly for those of you who may feel that today's presentation is a little bit too technical, you are welcome to take your leave. No one is obligated to stay. This is entirely voluntary, but you are welcome to sit in if you want to, or if you feel like it's just a little bit too much for you, you are welcome to take your leave. There will be no offense taken if folks need to move on and go do something else. Finally, I would like to just briefly introduce our speaker, Mr. John Lowery with WSP USA, a supervising engineer. I've known John and worked with him for several years now, and he's been involved in numerous price managed lane projects in California, the Bay Area Express Lane Network that's under development, the 2 express lanes that are operating in Los Angeles, operated by LA Metro, and I know that there are more projects coming down there. Riverside County Transportation Commission has some new express lanes that they've put into operation. John was involved in those. And John is also helping to support an effort in District 12 for a price managed lane project on Interstate 5. So when I reached out to the consulting industry to see who could help out with this particular workshop that I wanted to put together, John told me that he'd put some slides together on these very topics that I was interested in. And so he showed me what he put together. I said, that's great. I want to run with this. So I really appreciate the work that John has put into this. And I think, as I said, you're going to find this to be a very educational and informative session. And we will take time for questions along the way. So I'd ask you to hold your questions until those opportunities come up. But I'm hoping that what John has put together for you will really be beneficial. And so again, I'm really excited that you all are here today. I'm really excited that John has made this effort to put this together. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let you have at it, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to all for joining. It's nice to see some familiar faces out in the participant list, or see some familiar names at least. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Okay, is that coming through?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, happy Friday, everybody. Let's hope this is proves to be an interesting topic for all of you. And as Joe mentioned, I'm going to pause at several points during the presentation and invite questions and comments as we go. So our agenda here for today kind of broken up into 2 elements, 2 components of the presentation. We thought it would be good to start off with a very high-level overview of the different elements / functions of tolled managed lanes, and kind of go into a little bit of detail about the typical system architecture, and spend some time talking about maybe some of the elements of a toll system that are kind of behind the scenes, and spend some time talking about that. But the meat of our presentation is, as Joe mentioned, is really on the pricing component. So we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about pricing, starting off with the different forms of pricing, and then going into some detail about how we take, a facility, a corridor, and how we decide to break it up, and then going from that point, how we decide to display toll rates and the methodology behind that. And the idea really here is to give you as Caltrans staff who are an integral stakeholder in the project development and operations of these facilities, a good understanding of how they work, so that we can all be good partners in helping to deliver these throughout the state. So starting with the managed lanes tolling elements, different people will categorize this in different ways, and I've taken a very simplistic approach and grouped this into 4 categories. The first 2 shown here, the toll collection system and traffic management, are areas that I'm guessing a lot of you are probably the most familiar with, just because these are the elements we often spend a lot of time coordinating with Caltrans on during the project development phase, where we're going to locate equipment, the type of infrastructure we need, et cetera. But the last 2 elements, like I mentioned, I want to spend some time talking about some of the more behind the scenes things that are going on, but are also very critical to implementing and operating toll managed lanes, including the customer service center, and then everything that's required to operate and maintain the lanes once they're open. So a typical system architecture here, very high level, and this is really just intended to kind of show how these elements fit together. And I'm also distinguishing here between the elements that are typically located on the roadside, shown in the top here. And these include the things that like I mentioned, I'm sure folks are most familiar with: our toll readers, our license plate cameras, pricing signs, CCTVs, a lot of the things that we spend a lot of time designing and coordinating on. But I'm also, showing towards the bottom here, it's kind of the elements that I'm saying are sort of more behind the scenes, but obviously very critical to the operation of the toll system, including the customer service center, which in and of itself is a behemoth of a system to undertake and to implement. So spend some time talking about that. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about kind of the functions of what's shown here as the toll collection system host, what's kind of going on in the guts of the toll system in terms of receiving transactions, building trips, setting dynamic toll rates, and things of that nature. So I'm going to dive into each of these 4 elements. I have a slide on each of these the 4 elements I showed on the previous slide, and then I'll pause at that point and see if there's any questions on this overview. Starting with the toll collection system, here's an example toll point or toll gantry, really to illustrate the various pieces of equipment involved in detecting a vehicle to apply a toll. At a really high level, the way it works is that there's detection equipment either in the pavement or overhead that triggers the presence of a vehicle, alerting the system to capture either a toll tag or license plate. All of that's controlled by this lane controller that then is able to communicate with other equipment and the toll system host itself. 2 things I kind of want to point out here, and one of them is illustrated in this graphic with the kind of the gray and the blue shading, is that the toll system itself is implemented by, you might often hear TSI or toll system integrator, but it's implemented on infrastructure that's developed by a civil contractor. And so, as you can imagine, or maybe many of you have experience with this, that creates some challenges. Different toll system integrators have different requirements for, vibration and loading and things like that, where their equipment needs to be placed and positioned in reference to the roadway. So, creating some challenges in terms of just implementing these projects, making sure those contractors are coordinated. And then another kind of unique aspect to point out is that the toll system integrator contract is a little bit different than what we're often used to. It typically takes the form of a design, build, operate, maintain type of contract. So agencies are bringing on a toll system integrator who will, from soup to nuts, design a system in a way that meets the requirements that the agency has, set forth in their procurement documents, and then go on to build, test, commission, and then once the facility is open, operate and maintain the facility. A little bit about the toll collection system. The traffic management component, often the TSI will also implement many of these components. And here we're talking about the elements that are not directly involved in the detection of vehicle and the capturing toll tags and license plates, but all the equipment and necessary to monitor the roadway, monitor traffic conditions, and also to communicate information to drivers. Our CCTV cameras, our traffic detection equipment that can take different forms. Some projects have changeable message signs on the corridor to display messages about the lane status, example, HOV only mode or closed during incidents, things like that. And then we've got, the equipment and the workstation, sometimes video walls that are in place there where there are operators actually, observing conditions and taking actions as necessary. And some of those, real-time monitoring activities include, observing how the toll system is responding to traffic conditions that are being observed, needing to do toll overrides if necessary, if there's an incident or other conditions warrant kind of overriding the toll system in some way, that would take place. And then all of the coordination that takes place during an operation of coordinating with Caltrans and emergency services as appropriate, as conditions warrant. The customer service center, I mentioned before, this is quite a feat to implement a customer service center, and I'm not sure how much Caltrans has been involved with this. So I wanted to spend some time making sure that you all understood kind of what goes into it, and everything. We talked about the toll system integrator and all the design, build, operate, and maintain work that goes on. Well, that whole process is basically replicated when we're standing up a customer service center. There's often, a system integrator who will be procured to, design a system, and it's really important to make sure during that design that it meets the policies and the business rules that the agency has in place, because this is the customer touch point. This is it's really important to make sure that this is designed with care and attention, so that when you're in operations, you have a good customer interaction system set up. So what the customer service center sort of entails, I've again, very simplistic here. This could warrant its own presentation, but kind of the customer interaction elements. These are all the functions that allow customers to service their accounts, and that interaction is provided in a number of ways. There's typically a call center that's staffed with actual humans, but also involves kind of an automated phone tree type system where customers can do some basic things in an automated way, or speak to somebody if their needs are more complicated. There are physical facilities often where customers can go, say if they need to top up their accounts or what have you. Those include either walk-up facilities or even kiosks that can be more automated. And then of course there's other ways that customers can interact, include a website where they can see their account status and link their credit card information or bank account information. Some facilities have a mobile app that just makes it a little bit easier to access that same stuff from a smartphone. And then, besides all the customer interaction stuff, there's all kind of the nuts and bolts of managing accounts, making sure that tolls are being applied to the appropriate customer accounts, that accounts are being managed, maintained, violations processing, A lot of times, the customer service center is where there will be folks who do image review. And so as the toll system is collecting these license plate images, some of them need, human eyes on them to make sure that they're accurate. So that function can sometimes happen at the customer service center. And then, the inventory management and distribution of toll tags themselves is another function of the customer service center. So then there's everything that sort of needs to happen once you've got a toll system up and running. And this topic alone could easily warrant its own presentation too. But instead, I've kind of crammed some of the key elements here in one slide. And I really just want to give you sort of a flavor of what it takes to operate. We've talked about the procurement of the TSI and the customer service center contractors to implement those. Just want to, emphasize that managing those contracts takes significant resources. These, as you can imagine, these contracts are pretty, there's, very specified system requirements that these contractors need to adhere to, key performance indicators that are sort of tracked and monitored on a regular basis to make sure that things are happening accurately and that there are no, mistakes, going on or errors in the system. And that takes a lot of resources to be on top of and to make sure things are going smoothly. But then you also have a bunch of other contracts that need administering. A common one obviously is the contracting with CHP for enforcement of our managed lanes facilities, utility contractors, power and communications. And then there's often, maintenance contractors that can serve as sort of on call if there's something that happens that requires somebody to go out and fix something. So another key component is just the performance monitoring. And, we talked about, the operators who are sitting behind screens kind of looking at day-to-day operations, but this type of performance monitoring means sort of over time, sort of observing and tracking and making decisions based on trends and patterns that you're seeing over time. Because again, the whole idea of managed lanes is to make sure our policies and our tools are keeping up with what's going on, and so that we're preserving reliability on the facility. That requires quite a bit of work to create these trends and other reporting type of tools to make sure that we're adhering to those performance measures. And if we need to, making toll policy updates as a result. All of these facilities operate under adopted toll policies and toll ordinances, and so there is work that's required to update those and board actions and approvals that are needed to change some of those key policies. The whole customer interaction is obviously a real critical component, making sure your customer base understands how to use the facilities, all of the materials required to make sure customers are educated, and ongoing communications if there are changes in policies, that those are being communicated to customers. And then the whole financial aspect and budgeting is a whole nother aspect, making sure that there is annual operations and maintenance costs are covered, but not just looking short term, looking long term. Toll facilities equipment has a specific useful life. People will cite 7 to 10 years. So shortly after you implement these projects, you got to start thinking about putting some budget aside to maintain and upgrade the system when it reaches the end of its useful life. And then all of the planning and requirements that are associated with any net revenues are also part of the budgeting process. So that I will pause after kind of giving that overview. That's sort of a big picture overview of the various elements as I've categorized them. Again, people will categorize it differently perhaps, but I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions. And I don't know, Joe, if we mentioned how people should respond. Okay, I see a hand, so maybe I will do that.
Yeah. Thanks, John. I did forget to mention that. So if you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. So Jess Avila. Looks like I see you first. I'm going to just go as I see. I'm going to just walk down as I see the hands. I don't know whose hands go up first. I'm just going to just go down in order on the list. So Jeff.
Yeah, so my question has to do with the toll system integrator and the civil contract. As far as the infrastructure for the TSI is concerned, for projects that have been implemented, choosing the TSI equipment, is that something that's typically just a standard specification and it's a competitive bid between different contractors that provide that infrastructure?
The toll system
Yeah.
infrastructure. Yes, it is a competitive bid. A lot of toll system integrators kind of each of them have their own sort of roadside solution that they will they will implement. Yeah, it's a competitive bid, but it's often based on being able to demonstrate that they're meeting the particular requirements that an agency would set forth within their procurement documents. There are very prescriptive things in there.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Sutha.
Hi, John. Do you have some dollar values for the kind of an average for end of use replacements or kind of operation cost? That how do we put that one in the calculation now itself so that you keep that reserve available on the end of service life option?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously it does depend on sort of the scope and size of the facility. If we're talking about, a 20-mile project or a 5-mile project, just the amount of equipment that's out there, and so that'll affect your costs to rehab the system.
Just an estimate like per mile or something like that. If we have a number that you can share, you don't need to do it now, but if you can share with the team later, at least that will give us a starting point, so that way that okay, it's going to be this many dollars. I know that certain things will go out in 10 years, certain things go out in 20 years, certain things will last for, you don't need to put the gantries because the gantries may last 50 years. So depending on the type. So based on the history of this one, maybe if you have or if you can share, that'll be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Sean Nazari.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, John and Joe, for getting us together this morning. I have a question regarding what can be done to improve the toll systems integration to better line up with civil improvements. In our experience in San Francisco Bay Area, we often deal with a situation where the civil improvements are completed and the toll system integration lags. And that results into challenges for us in terms of safety, operations, enforcement, and ultimately leading to motorist confusion and dissatisfaction as well. Are there lessons learned? Are there things we can do to make these two line up a little better? Is there something that we're not doing or should be doing so that when the civil improvements are completed, we're ready to toll?
Yeah.
John, before you jump into that, can I just interject here real quick? So, folks, I do greatly appreciate the questions that are being raised here on this general aspect of things, and I do hear the very specific questions about the development of contracts and planning for system integration and the work that goes into that. I see a need for a separate workshop that could really delve into this topic in more detail. John and I have talked about this. John's got some good material for that. However, we have only about an hour and a half, and there's some really important material that I would like John to get and share and share with you. So, if I may, I'd like to ask that it sounds like we need to have a second workshop on this. I wanted to talk with the group about this after John was finished with his presentation. I'm just going to make the call now, John. I think we need to put something together to address these questions in more detail. Sean's topic that he brought up here is a big issue, which is one that I think merits discussion. I just don't know that we have the time to really get into it today. So if I could, I'd like to see if maybe we can table this part of the discussion, and let's plan, John, you and I can talk about this offline, I think. We can schedule a second workshop just to focus exclusively on this area, because I know it's a real big interest to a lot of folks within the department.
Sounds like a good
Okay,
plan.
thank
Everybody's
you.
support on that. Yeah, I hope everybody's support on that. I see a need here for this. I want to make sure that we provide you with what you need, but I do have to keep in mind that we have some time constraints and we've got a lot of material that we need to go through. So I do see two more. Sean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off that way, but I want to move forward, but we will make some time for that discussion down the road.
Okay,
Thank you. I appreciate your understanding. I just need to keep this. I want to keep this thing rolling because we do have about an hour, and John's still got a lot of slides he's got to get through.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I imagine there's going to be this is meant to generate probably a lot of different thoughts and questions, but it's good. We'll capture these down as they come up. So thanks for bringing them up. So I will continue. Yeah, Joe.
Yes, please.
Okay. Alrighty, let's go on. So now we're gonna talk about pricing in some detail here. And big picture, I think hopefully most folks understand this. The goal of pricing on managed lanes is really first and foremost about maintaining optimal travel conditions. And the basic idea being that the toll level is commensurate with the level of demand on the facility. And that's, sort of illustrated here in a very simplistic way. The toll is lower when traffic is lower and is higher when traffic is higher. Also, but I don't want to gloss over, other considerations, sometimes secondary, but, revenue generation. We were just talking about the cost to rehab and replace and to operate facilities. So I don't want to discount, revenue generation because it is important. But again, it is something that we often consider as sort of, the first and foremost goal is to make sure we're maintaining reliable travel conditions. And then, secondarily, but almost just as important is we need to make sure we're able to cover the cost of the facility at a bare minimum. And if, ideally, in a perfect world, we'd be generating potential excess net revenue that can go into reinvestments in the corridor. So let's talk about kind of the two different types of pricing that exist currently for express lanes, tolled managed lanes, time of day pricing, and dynamic pricing. Starting with time of day pricing, facilities that employ time of day pricing typically have some sort of a toll schedule in place that varies by day of the week, an hour of the day. I'll show an example in just a second. And it's posted, it's accessible. People can go and see it before they travel, and they can kind of know, they can expect what the toll will be. And the idea, again, is that toll rates are typically higher in those hours, those peak hours where demand is greatest, and are lower in some of the off-peak hours. Probably the most famous example that folks are familiar with is the SR 91 in Orange and Riverside counties, but also the Denver region, their managed lanes, their express lanes. Although they currently employ time of day pricing, will soon be switching over to dynamic pricing. Some of the basics here, pros and cons, because it's a posted toll schedule, the predictability and the ability for customers, drivers to sort of know in advance what their toll is going to be is kind of an advantage here. And it also, from a behavior, maybe from a behavior change point of view, you can maybe make an argument that it's nice that customers can kind of go to a toll schedule and see when tolls are really high, and maybe that would influence their decision to take their trip on a less congested period when tolls are lower. You can kind of make that argument, I guess. Implementation is a little bit easier with time of day pricing. We're going to talk about this more, but there's no dynamic pricing algorithm that needs to be developed, tested, and sort of operated over its life. Some of the cons here is that you really have to stay on top of your time of day schedule to make sure it's meeting the need day by day, right? You can't just sort of set it and forget it. In fact, that's going to be a sort of theme with both of these options, is that neither of them are real sort of set it and forget it models. Even dynamic pricing doesn't work that way. Potential for higher toll rates. If you are sort of pricing by the hour, you kind of have to make sure your toll rate is set in such a way that the peak 5 or 15 minutes of that hour aren't saturated with too many vehicles. So you might have to set a toll rate that applies to the whole hour, but maybe doesn't need to be. So kind of a disadvantage there. And then of course your ability to actively manage if there's an incident, an unpredicted sort of event happens, and that's not your typical peak period congestion. Your time of day toll schedule is not really able to respond in any kind of way. On the flip side, dynamic pricing, the majority of facilities at this point use dynamic pricing, as you can see here, including most of the facilities in California. The idea here is that there's a dynamic pricing algorithm that's actually monitoring traffic conditions in real time, and using those inputs to either increase or decrease the toll as appropriate. So in this way, it's really it can be more responsive to demand as it's being experienced on the corridor. You can make a case here that maybe overall average toll rates have the potential to be a little bit lower because you're not having to set block kind of chunky prices that apply to whole blocks of time. You're able actually to only have high tolls when demand really warrants it, and then bring them back down when demand kind of comes down. But here the real it takes work to design, implement, and then to kind of oversee the dynamic pricing algorithm. It's not something that, because it's automated, that you just sort of like press go on day one and it just sort of operates flawlessly in the background. It also requires updates and inputs, and here you don't have the predictability as much. I mean, you're still able to tell customers, you can expect prices to be between, X and Y, or, you can set sort of max tolls and minimum tolls, but you're not able to say, at 10 o'clock, it's going to be $5, 12 o'clock, it's going to be $3, right? So high level, those are the kind of differences. And then here's kind of an example to sort of maybe illustrate. Maybe the one on the left is familiar to some of you, the 91. This is a 91 express lanes toll schedule for the Riverside County portion, the eastbound direction. I pulled this maybe over a month ago, so it might be out of date at this point, I'm not sure. But you can kind of see here that, tolls in the eastbound direction, the PM peak, the afternoon period is really the congested period. You can see that reflected, especially on Fridays when everybody's kind of leaving the LA area. Tolls are pretty high, and then during other periods, toll rates are pretty low. On the right, I'm showing an example express lane that employs dynamic pricing, and this is really just to illustrate a couple of things. So you can see here in this top graph, so the yellow is the express lane speed, and the green is the toll rate. And in this particular example, the PM peak is where we're seeing some high demand. And you can see that the toll rate has a setting that it will not go above $5. And you kind of see that it's hitting that. It's kind of plateauing right at that $5. This is just to kind of illustrate the monitoring and observing kind of aspect that you would see this, and if you see this happen repeatedly over time, it might sort of nudge you to consider maybe, does this $5 make sense anymore? Do we need to nudge it up a little bit, especially if you start to see that yellow speed, line start to come down. And down here, kind of another, little aspect that time of day pricing wouldn't be able to account for, but you can see that, in the non-typical, this isn't a typical peak period, in this 2:30 hour, speed started to drop a little bit I don't know why, but they started to drop a little bit. The dynamic pricing algorithm is able to respond to that in real time. Whereas if this was time of day priced, because it happened outside of a peak period, you might not be able to do that. That's my spiel on the two different pricing types. I was going to pause here for any quick questions about those two, or are folks generally familiar with those?
John, I see a question in the chat. What are the specialized tools for dynamic pricing?
Specialized tools include primarily the dynamic pricing algorithm itself, but also those things that feed the dynamic pricing algorithm, which includes pretty robust traffic detection equipment that's capable of measuring volume, speeds, densities, and feeding that in to the algorithm that can then decide whether it needs to increase or decrease the toll.
All right, looks like we got a couple of hands up too. So Don Halou, see you first.
Hi, how many miles is that 91 eastbound express lane?
Ooh, I think it's about 10. Anybody can correct me in the chat if
It's 10 miles.
Watch that. 10. Thank you.
Oh, okay, so it would be like $2.60 a mile for the peak.
For that peak, yeah.
Thanks.
This is just the Riverside County. There's also the Orange County, right? So you have the two approximately 10-mile express lanes there in Riverside and Orange.
Oh yeah, this is Riverside. Okay, thanks.
Right, and the peaks, like I said, they as John explained. I'm sorry to interrupt, Vicky Dewey. They're in my backyard, so I figure I should respond to that. They change, a time of day, and they adjust them frequently, but it is a little surprising sometimes to see $26, and that's only half your drive on the express lanes.
And are there a lot of people using it at $26, or there are a lot of people going for free?
There are a lot of folks paying that $26.
There's a lot of people paying that? Okay.
We're charging that much because the facility is optimized to run at a maximum 1,650 to 1,700 vehicles per lane. And if we can get it, they will charge it.
Well, not only that, there's a price elasticity that as you keep increasing the price, then more and more people will jump out of the toll lanes and ensure a consistent travel time within the corridor.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I had one more question, but I had I'll think about it in a minute. Thanks.
Thank you. Lance Hall, District 4.
Yeah, question on looking at your top graph. I'm just wondering why the toll rate is varying so much during when your speed drops. I would expect that line to be more stable.
Yeah, I think the graph I'm showing here is I think it's capturing points at very discrete places, and so that's why it's choppy. I wouldn't read too much into why it might be missing some points to smooth it out.
And in general, the dynamic pricing algorithms that try to do the smoothing so that you don't have a yo-yo price effect are the newer approach to how you don't see a lot of change over a very short period of time. So different algorithms will handle that quite differently in the dynamic pricing scenario.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I don't see any additional hands up here in the participants. So, John, I think you can move on.
Oh, I had one more question, Joe. This is Dawn Halou.
Yes. Okay.
Is the pricing algorithm for the time of day on the 91, is that based on volumes and speeds of the express lanes or of the GP lanes, or a combination of both?
Oh, sorry.
I'm just gonna say I'm going to defer to the people who worked on that.
I'll really quickly. It's not a dynamic pricing algorithm. It's a a schedule that's set kind of manually, but it's based primarily driven by volumes. Particularly, there's some particular pinch points where volumes are kind of the constraining factor, and so the toll rates are largely pegged to those volumes that are measured over a period of time. So if those volumes are hit over, say, a 12-week period, that's what triggers the toll rate to go up or down.
Okay, so it's volumes in the express lane.
In the express lanes.
Thank you.
Okay, I should probably keep going, right, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to get into some more aspects of pricing, and we're going to talk about how we apply a pricing to, say, kind of a typical corridor. And here I'm going to use a hypothetical corridor as an example to illustrate. So we've got a kind of 15-mile corridor here. It goes from A to D. And in this particular corridor, we've got sort of these three sort of segments that kind of operate differently. This middle segment is pretty congested. I don't know, say this interchange, may dump a lot of traffic into this segment, kind of causing some congestion. And then by the time a lot of that traffic may exit at this interchange, and then conditions kind of open up after that. And then you have this segment in advance of the congested segment where you might have some spillback. So this could be a kind of a typical situation. But gonna kind of imagine like what it would be like if we were to apply a price to this entire corridor. So imagine we, sorry, I changed on you. Imagine we applied a $10 toll, a single price for this entire corridor. Anybody traveling anywhere in this corridor is going to see $10 to get to the end, and they pay $10. Again, this is just a very simplistic way to do it, but I'm driving towards why we do it the way we do it. So kind of just sort of bear with me, I guess, here. So what would this really kind of look like if we were to do that? This entire 15-mile chunk, we're just going to say it's $10 to travel in it during this particular time. Well, you can probably imagine that price, I called it $10, but whatever it is likely going to be driven primarily by what's going on in this segment. This is where your congestion is. This is where you're really going to need to make sure that you're preserving reliability, and this is where your highest demand is. So that $10 is largely going to be driven by what's going on here. And what is that probably going to mean is that, these other segments where there's less congestion here and no congestion here probably are going to be pretty underutilized because you've kind of not very gracefully just applied a toll for this very kind of different type of corridor, and you just generically applied one toll to the whole thing. So it may not be the most efficient way to do it. And really what that's leading to, and maybe you've all already gotten here, but we try to break corridors down into smaller pieces. I'm calling them segments here. Different agencies throughout the state actually will call them different things. Some call them segments, some call them zones, but anyways, segments. And the real idea here is to try to capture kind of sections of the corridor that are sort of homogeneous, that sort of have similar characteristics. And not all corridors are this kind of clear cut. But in this example, if you were presented with this, it seems like a great way you could segment this into 3 segments, right? You would try to capture the congested segment within the limits of segment 2, so that you can apply. And the idea of segmenting is once you have your segments defined, you can apply pricing specifically for use of that particular piece of the roadway. So, in this example, if we segmented it this way, we not only are capturing, like conditions within each segment, but what we also try to do is we try to have segments kind of terminate at a place where people are destined to, because the segment end kind of corresponds to what we show on the pricing signs. We price to the end of segments. So you kind of want those to line up with somewhere that people are going. So this is a perfect example where we've perfectly captured, each of the characteristics that are going on, and we've terminated the segments at places where people are destined to. And you can see we're able to sort of more fine tune, in a typical peak period, segment 2 can have its, whatever toll it needs to be to operate efficiently, whereas the less congested segments can have, a lower toll rate as appropriate. And so the idea here being you're getting better utilization of these less congested segments because you're able to fine tune a lower toll rate for those. So that's kind of just intended to describe how we segment corridors for the purposes of applying pricing. So now I'm going to kind of go into, now that we know how we define segments, there's different ways we can then apply pricing and display that information to customers. And I'm going to illustrate 3 different ways. I'm going to walk through kind of each one to kind of give you a flavor for how this can work. So in the segment pricing approach, the idea here is that we're displaying, we've got in this example, we've got a hypothetical corridor. There's 4 segments, and each segment has its own price that can change as it needs to. But with segment pricing, the idea is that we're displaying prices one segment at a time. So these squares are intended to represent like what a customer would see on, say, a pricing sign. So somebody approaching segment 1 would see the price for segment 1, and they'd see the price to get to the end of it, and they'd make a decision. $1 sounds good, I'm getting in. And then as they approach segment 2, they're going to see another price to tell them how much segment 2 costs, and they're going to make a decision, yay or nay, either get in or stay in or get out, right? And they're kind of doing that along the corridor. And I'm going to talk about kind of the pros and cons of this, but you can kind of see, like, customers have to sort of decide constantly as they're making their trip, but you can kind of operate pretty efficiently here, right? Because you're able to sort of have people make decisions at discrete points along their trip and get in or get out. So you're kind of able to really make sure you're managing demand along the way, potentially. Another example, trip pricing. Here, again, we still have segments, and each segment still has its own price. But what we're doing here is we're displaying to customers the price to travel to the end of a particular facility. The way that's typically implemented is that we display, and again, these are intended to be kind of examples of what customers would see on signs, a very simplified way. How this typically ends up looking is that customers get a price for the immediate segment 1, so that's the $1, and then they get a combined price to travel all the way to the end. And we're going to talk about this more, but one of the key fundamental principles of pricing and express lanes is that you got to make sure customers aren't paying more than what they see on the sign, certainly, and you want to really be able to tell them that they're going to pay the price that they see on the sign. So they're locked in. When you give them this combined $4.50 price to go all the way to D, and you're giving that to them right up front, that's the price they're locked into. They're going to pay $4.50. We'll talk about how that actually happens. But you can imagine that could be appealing from a customer point of view. Hey, I'm going to the end. I got my price to the end. I don't have to do any math along the way. I don't have to make decisions. I'm in it. But in this example, we have 4 segments. Imagine as this facility gets sort of longer and longer, if this were a long facility, you're really kind of hindering your ability to manage demand the longer that facility gets, by guaranteeing that price right up front, because you have no ability to influence that customer once they're in the lane. And say you're locking them in for a 20-mile trip. Well, what if something happens 15 miles down the way and you really need to get a lot of people, price them out of the lane or get them out of the lane, you've already locked a lot of folks in, so you can't. So these are kind of two extremes, I guess. Segment pricing is sort of discrete, one by one. Facility pricing, let's just give them the price for the whole thing. Then there's this other approach, sometimes referred to as zone pricing. And the idea here is that you are breaking up your corridor into pieces. And it's kind of a compromise or kind of a hybrid approach, right? Because you're trying to, not like segment pricing, you don't want your customer to constantly every 3 to 5 miles make a decision, get in and get out, right? You want to give them some predictability and guarantee them a price to some meaningful place. And that's done by defining zones, which are just, smaller than the entire trip. But it's, still giving them a larger chunk. So how this works is, instead of in the trip pricing example, we're no longer giving them the price to D, to the end. We're giving them the price to the end of the zone, which is, in this case, it's B. So they'll get in and they'll get locked into the end of B, and then B becomes their new decision point going forward. Do they want to get into the next zone? And they'll be presented with a new set of pricing for that next zone. And this kind of illustrates what I've sort of been describing. So I've got the three different pricing approaches that we just walked through here in the middle: segment pricing, zone pricing, and trip pricing. And I'm kind of showing them on these two different scales just to illustrate this point that, let's start with segment pricing and customer perception up at the top. As I mentioned, from a customer point of view, segment pricing really does require a lot of decision making along the way. On the other end of the spectrum, trip pricing, customers will probably view this very favorably because they're guaranteed their price to the end of the facility right off the bat. And then look at this other scale down at the bottom here, operational effectiveness, where, segment pricing, it probably preserves the greatest ability to manage demand because you're only locking in, segment by segment. You can change people's decision making along the way, whereas you can't do that with trip pricing. And zone pricing kind of sits, sort of in the middle. It's kind of this hybrid sort of approach that tries to kind of take the best of both worlds. So that's what we're seeing. This kind of summarizes the three options, and also kind of shows you where each is used. They all are in existence. I don't know that I'll talk too much through the pros and cons here, because I think I really this is kind of just a summary slide to kind of wrap it all up. So I see some hands already going up, so maybe I'll pause on this slide and see if it raises more questions, but let's pause now for questions on these three pricing methodologies.
Adam Siddiqui, looks like you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Joe, and thank you, John. Great discussion. I want to have a question completely out of the box, and I hope it's not some sort of embarrassing question, but I want to just throw it and see how it works. Number one is reverse incentivization system. Is that in the algorithm or not? And number two, any different pricing for classification? As we know, a bigger truck, slower truck will take more load on the system versus a small sport car. And is there a way that we can micromanage that?
What was the first thing? Reverse incentive?
Incentivization. Let's say the system predict that it is a certain price, either under a fixed or dynamic system, or through the segment, or through a time period. But later on, maybe the congestion is not there anymore. Can the system incentivize the user reversely, and instead of $10, we'll go back and reduce it to $8 or whatever? I'm just giving an example to make sure that people know that there is an honest way of getting charged for their trip.
Yeah. So okay, two parts. So the whole point is to not charge high tolls when we don't need to. So when congestion is lower, the idea is to charge something lower so that it incentivizes people to use the lane. Ideally, you want to have this thing well utilized. Nobody wants to have an empty lane. So the goal of the tolling is to, whether it's dynamic or time of day, to make sure that the lane's utilized. Classification, all of our express lanes in California, trucks are not permitted. So there's no price classification based on trucks.
If it is other than trucks, bigger vehicles, buses or things like that, versus
The only
smaller car or
the only price price classification, if you want to call it that, is there are discounts available for folks who are in carpools. That varies by facility, whether it's 2-person or 3-person carpools. There are discounts in some facilities that vary for specific clean air vehicles that meet particular requirements. So there are classifications for that to incentivize those modes.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
All right, I'm not sure who was next, but I see Lance.
Yeah, I got a comment on your toll zone and more on the pricing signs. In your last zone or segment, you're only showing one price. And we've had an issue in the Bay Area here on how you get the message
I know.
out that you have another zone or another segment coming up. And we recommend that you put the price of that next zone on the bottom line. In that last segment, we've kind of had some pushback from the operators in the Bay Area on that. But we feel like there's no information on what the price to the next zone is coming up at the end of the segment. This also happens at the county lines where you have two different operators. They say they can't integrate their systems together, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, or they just don't want to integrate their systems together to have the price to the next county, basically. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight and those comments, Lance. One of the things that zone, I hear what you're saying. I've been involved in some of those conversations, and I'm going to go through some slides in a minute that talk about how we lock in prices and how we do trip building that may try to inform, why we do have to cut off at the end of a zone. We can't start pricing for the next zone within the current zone the way the toll systems are, set to lock people into their prices and to build trips. So hopefully maybe, and if they don't, you can chime in again, but we'll walk through that and hopefully that'll maybe give you a little bit of insight into that. And also maybe a little bit of insight into how it can become very, very complicated and complex when you start to talk about integrating multiple toll systems together and having one toll system displaying pricing that's controlled by another toll system. So let's see. We'll see if those slides kind of help in that discussion.
And just one other question: would especially where you have the issue at the county line where you have two different operators operating it, would that go away if you just have one operator doing the whole system throughout the the district?
Well, I think what the characteristic that you're referring to has probably a lot to do with the way that the tolling authority has been set. I think you're referring, I think, particularly to the Bay Area where there's particular counties that have their own independent toll authority to operate. And so that's why we're seeing, destinations that that correspond more or less with the ending of a county. If you had, one operator who was, operating all facilities across all counties, I think that would, if you didn't also have the county authority issue where certain counties can operate within their county, if you took that away and you had one operator, then yeah, I guess theoretically you could get away from having the county line be any significant, boundary.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay. Benson, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I was wondering, how do you charge for people
jump in the middle of a segment. Do we provide access in the middle of the segments?
Yeah, that great question, Vincent. I haven't really touched on, I've been using these hypothetical corridors, and I haven't said whether they're continuous access or whether they're limited access. And that obviously introduces a whole lot of nuance about, a lot of this stuff. Continuous versus limited access maybe could be another sort of topic area for thinking of topics to cover in a future scenario. But I've kind of intentionally stayed away from defining continuous versus limited access in this particular presentation.
Thank you.
Mark Deflin, I see your hand has gone up and down a few times during this presentation. If you've got something to share, please take your liberty.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. I had two things. One, first of all, John, really good overview and presentation, so I appreciate all of that. On your first chart on typical system architecture, I noticed like image review was not present, and I just think it's important to point out that it's more than a trend now. It's really a practice that the roadside integrator, as you call the toll system integrator, it's incumbent on them now to do image review to produce fully formed transactions for the back office. And maybe for Caltrans to recognize that there's an operational component now to these contracts. So that was just something I wanted to point out. The other thing is more of a question, and that has to deal with, managed lanes are often high occupancy toll lanes or express lanes, and enforcement is really a challenge because single occupants can buy into the lane, yet how do you enforce that? And I know there's occupancy detection systems out there that are trying to work, but some are better than others. And I wondered if you had any view on how we can improve the integrity of the lanes through enforcement techniques, just beyond license plate capture, but actual occupancy counting.
Yeah, enforcement. Gosh, another one of those topics where there's actually a lot going on too in the state. There's some pilots here in the Bay Area, kind of testing two different approaches. One using roadside cameras that are capable of detecting the number of occupants in a vehicle, and another that uses smartphones as a way to detect the number of occupants in a vehicle. And those are kind of in their early phases of testing. I know in Southern California, they're in LA particularly, they're deploying a video occupancy detection system. So this is definitely an evolving area, and one that I've heard a lot of agencies, boards are really pressuring the agencies to find solutions to do more, because it's recognized that those who cheat the system really have degrade it and make it less valuable as a travel option.
All right. I'm not seeing any additional hands up at this point, so John, it looks like you can continue on.
Okay. Okay, we're going to talk through two kind of topics. One is price locking, and then we're going to talk about trip building. Again, another very simplified example here, where, again, I mentioned price locking is kind of a key component. We're displaying toll rates on pricing signs, and we tell customers that that's the toll they're going to pay. And if toll rates were to go up while they're traveling in the facility, we got to make sure that we're not applying that higher toll rate and that we're applying the lower toll rate that they may have seen. So this really just kind of illustrates that very, very simply. So in this example, a driver sees a price to travel to the next downstream destination of $250. And by the time they get in the facility, they like the price of $250. Yeah, so okay, imagine this says $2. They see a price to travel to destination one, apologies. it's $2. By the time they get in, it's increased by 50 cents. And now the pricing sign is displaying $2.50. It's reflecting that price increase. Of course, the driver is well downstream of that. They have no idea that the price has gone up. But we need to make sure that that $2 price is being applied. So just walk through in a very simplified way how that happens. So I apologize, guys. Here I'm jumping 50 cents all over the price here. The idea was to illustrate that they saw a price, it went up by 50 cents. We want to give them the lower price. How does that happen? The toll gantry captures the vehicle via transponder, via license plate, and it captures the time that they physically were detected at that gantry. But that's not really the time we're interested in terms of applying a toll. We need to know when they saw the sign, which could be, it definitely was previous to having passed the gantry. So what often happens, and different toll systems do this differently, and I won't get into a lot of details, but obviously we know the distance between the pricing sign and that toll gantry. There are different ways that this happens, but the system's capable of calculating, some systems are capable of calculating average speeds kind of in real time, like how long it's taking an average vehicle to travel between the sign and the toll gantry. And it can use that to estimate kind of a sign view time. So in this case, it knows that average speeds are 4 or 5 miles per hour, and it says, okay, that at this point in time, I want to make sure that I'm giving vehicles the toll that was in effect 2 minutes prior to that gantry time, that 7:45 in this example. So we're going to subtract off those 2 minutes and then look up what the toll rates in effect were at that previous time at 7:43, and that's how they get locked into the previous toll. And again, I apologize for jumping all over $2.50, $3. I hope that general idea made sense. I guess my quality control on this slide wasn't the best. So that's trip locking. I'm going to kind of take it a step further. That was a very simple example. One price was displayed and just one downstream destination. Let's kind of look at an example where we've got multiple segments again. And here I'm showing a hypothetical, again, corridor with the 3 segments. Kind of maybe ties back to that previous corridor I was showing where the congested, the middle segment was the most congested. So it's got the higher toll rate and the 250s, medium congestion, the $1, lower congestion. But in this example, let's say we're doing a form of trip pricing, which remember, we're displaying the price to the end of this particular facility. And so we're showing the price for, the first segment, $250, and then the combined price to the end at $850. So they're seeing, wow, I did it again. They're seeing $850 to travel to destination 3. But by the time they get, say, down halfway through the corridor, the toll has increased in this segment. It was $5, it now is $6. And so the pricing sign well upstream is reflecting that dollar increase, $9.50. But again, we want to make sure they paid the $8.50, not the $9.50. But here we have a little bit more complexity, right? Because it's, it's the second segment of a multi-segment trip. So kind of seeing how that impacts things here. So as the vehicle is passing through each of these toll points, data is being sent back to the toll system host. And it's recording, I saw vehicle ABC at gantry A at this time, gantry B at this time, gantry C at this time. And it takes all of that information and it, as somebody was just mentioning, either via image review or if they happen to capture all of the transponders perfectly, the system is able to say, okay, I saw vehicle A, B, and C at these 3 points. It made the trip from A to C. Yeah. And then it uses that. It says, okay, it made the trip from A to C. I know it started at A. So what was the pricing sign showing it, in advance of where they got in before toll gantry A? So again, it uses that trip build, which knows it started at A, to kind of do that same logic and say, okay, what were average speeds between that pricing sign and that toll gantry A at the time? Again, in this example, we've calculated it was 2 minutes. So then it does that look back to say, okay, what were the toll rates in effect at 7:43, not the time when the vehicle passed through, to apply that the original toll that they saw on the sign. And then this is really just to illustrate kind of the passing off to the customer service. So that's the toll system does this trip locking, and trip building. It builds a fully formed trip, and then it sends to the customer service center, vehicle ABC made a trip from A to D or from A to C at this point in time, and here was the toll amount. So going back to our the 3 different pricing methodologies, and this is where I'm going to kind of close it out here. It becomes hopefully you can appreciate how segment pricing is a pretty kind of be viewed as pretty straightforward. You're not the trip build doesn't exist really because you're just tolling them segment by segment. If they got in the segment, they're paying that price for that segment. The next time, same sort of thing. Trip pricing, because you're locking in, that 450 right off the bat, you're really reliant on an accurate trip build throughout the system to make sure you're getting vehicle A, B, C, kind of all the way through so that you can determine their entry point and their exit point, look back and do that sign time to make sure they're getting the toll charged. And again, all of the other components of as this trip becomes bigger and bigger, you're also kind of diminishing your ability to operationally manage the lane. So just wanting to kind of give you some of that background to see, trip pricing, although it may be nice from a customer point of view, and we all might think like, hey, why can't we just show the price to the end of, all our facilities, or give customers, more downstream information sooner. I mean, it's a great concept, and I think it comes from a customer friendly place. But I'm trying to illustrate kind of some of the limitations from like the sort of the toll system perspective that can kind of preclude that ability or make it very difficult. And so, the zone pricing model, and again, I'm not advocating that any one of these is better than the other. I think I'm just trying to sort of illustrate kind of how we got to where we are with the zone pricing model, how it's trying to thread this needle, and balance these two competing needs, one needing to manage demand, but also giving customers something that's meaningful. And so in this zone pricing model, with what we know about price locking, we price lock for the first zone. If we started to display prices within the first zone to zone 2 or the next downstream zone, we've then price locked them in at that point too, right? And so if you kind of keep doing that, you're not you're getting away from like the concept that brought us to zone pricing in the beginning, which is to have a defined, contained sort of zone where we trip build and we guarantee within that zone, and then we sort of do the same thing going on and on, right? And the idea that also this is very modular, right? This is something where, if we had 2 different operators on either side of these zones, it works. And because you're not having to, as Lance was mentioning, and I won't get into too much detail, but, integrating with the downstream toll system to display prices, this kind of creates a nice sort of boundary and is modular. You can kind of build onto it without degrading your toll system's ability to manage demand because you're just doing it sort of chunk by chunk. So that's pretty much the end there. So I will pause again for additional questions and comments. That was a lot, I'm sure.
Looks like we got several hands up here. So Dawn, I'll let you go first. Again, I'm just going in the roster that I have here on my screen.
Yeah, can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure. This one?
Yeah, sorry, I have a bulldog barking in the background. If I get in between C and D, do I pay 75 or do I pay the whole zone?
In the bottom example here, if you get in between C and D, you're only paying the 75 cents. The zone is really
Oh.
about you're locking if you get in at the B, if you get in anywhere in the zone, you're locked into the full zone price, whether or not you take the full zone. If you did take the full zone, you were locked into that price. If you don't take the full zone, you only pay the segment. Does that make sense?
No, because if it's zone 2 and it's zone pricing, if I get in between C and D, why wouldn't I pay the full zone?
Okay, I think you're kind of thinking zone as like well, I don't want to get into semantics. As like a segment where a zone is not really applying. Yes, we are kind of combining this segment and this segment price into a zone price, but we're doing that only for the benefit of the customer. If they were to travel the full zone, they're getting locked into it, but we're actually tracking segment by segment what they use, and if they only use one segment in that zone, they're going to pay the price they see for that one segment. It's similar, maybe Don, if this helps, if they get in at B and if they get in at B, their price to D is $2, but say they get out at C, they're only paying the $1.25, but they were locked into the $2. So if they did decide to continue and go into this last segment, regardless of what's happened to this price in the time it took them to get there, they were locked into that $2. So the zone is really about kind of the idea of locking in prices for stretches, but still preserving the ability to only charge people for the segments they use.
Hi, hey John, it's Darren, and hi Dawn. It's probably worth pointing out that these are three sort of the most common and simplified versions of how this works, but there really is no right or wrong answer. It can very much be on a case-by-case basis, and the way that you're describing it, Dawn, there are examples where they handle it that way, where basically there might be multiple access points along a zone, but at any point, if you're detected in that zone, you do get charged the full freight. So no right or wrong answer. This just happens to be one of the more common examples that John is using.
Thank you, Darren. All right, Sean Nazari.
Yes, hi again. So to me, it seems that traditionally on highways, we've tried to balance safety and mobility. Make sure the highways are safe, make sure we provide the maximum mobility. We've always given safety a higher priority. That's why we have speed limits and, no left turns, et cetera, et cetera. Here we are adding another element into it, pricing. So now we have to balance the three: safety, mobility, pricing. And again, for years, we realized that, we need to communicate clearly and consistently and uniformly with drivers. And we've done that through signage. One of the main guide signs we have are our control city guide signs. So I really appreciate the three methods that you've put out there. If we were to give, priority to safety, I would suggest we stay with trip and facility pricing, because that would limit the number of decisions that a driver has to make along their trip. The less the decisions they make, the less circumstances they are put in to make decisions, the safer their trip. Now, zone pricing, obviously, is that balance that you mentioned, trying to meet both sides. Segment pricing adds more decisions, less safe. So let me tie it back to the control city. If our drivers are used to the concept of relying on control city signage to set their destinations, to kind of have predictability for the way they travel and they see things, seems to me if we focus towards the zone pricing and set our zones based on control city signage, or maybe even the less volatile bottlenecks. I think the bottlenecks kind of are what drive the congestion. So if we find the right balance between our control city signage and the bottleneck locations, we can over time create some sort of a stable pattern for the drivers to be able to say, hey, I'm going this far. If I get to point B, that's my point to make a decision and not have to make too many decisions at the time. And if we have a more volatile bottleneck that creates that kind of a decision, I would stay away from setting my zone on that. So just a few thoughts on my part. Thank you.
Very, very good comments. Yeah.
Yeah, John and Sean, I would just note that the decisions with regards to where those zones begin and end, a lot of that is based on volume and demand and origin destination studies. I'll defer to the folks from industry who work on this on a daily basis to maybe elaborate on that a little bit more. But the philosophy behind setting those limits is that's really the philosophy behind setting those limits. I don't know if anybody wants to add further to that. If anybody has additional information they can share on that.
You're absolutely right, Joe. The zones are intended to get, I mean, we don't just sort of pick them out of thin air. They're really about guaranteeing pricing for a stretch that makes sense from a customer perspective too, and getting people through, like you said, Sean, if there's a key bottleneck, probably don't want a zone to terminate, in a bottleneck that we know, sort of exists all the time, and that becoming a decision point in a bottleneck that doesn't make a lot of sense. So there is a lot of sort of traffic operations that goes into this. It's also, where major interchanges and destinations sort of fall. Sometimes you want a zone to get you through an interchange, which may look kind of weird. You're like, why am I pricing past the interchange? Well, you're trying to get, people kind of through that bottleneck or that high weaving area and not dump them into a place where there's a lot of weaving and then they need to get out of an express lane and weave all the way across to get to an interchange. So I don't know if others have.
My point is exactly that we want to make sure the driver has enough, or let's put it this way, the driver has as few decisions that they have to make in a quick moment. Because if they're waiting for a price to be displayed to make their mind up, they're taking their eye off the road, they're going to take chances to get in or out of the lane. So I think we should always give safety a highest priority and not make pricing or revenue generation, the primary goal here. Between safety, mobility, pricing, I would rank them exactly like that: safety, mobility, pricing. We don't have to make a penny out of every minute of the day, just as long as we keep the roads safe and moving. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, I see two more hands up here. Lance, it's like you.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. So with your zone pricing, I still don't understand why at your segment between A and B, you couldn't put the price to C below B on that sign, at least on the last BTMS in that zone. Because I know you're saying you don't want to, you're kind of extending that B to D zone. But we do this at the start of the express lanes too, where we have a BTMS upstream of the start of the lane. So I just want to know if you have a comment on that.
I wish I had a really quick answer, but I do have a lot of thoughts about it. And, I could get into great detail about sort of what that does in terms of it actually causes customers to have to do some weird subtractions and additions to figure out when you overlay what you just described with the price locking, the fact that they are getting locked into prices, like kind of overlapping with one another, the ramifications of that become very complicated, besides all of the reasons that we kind of already talked about, like wanting to preserve, these discrete modular chunks and not overlap the two. But we're kind of out of time. I don't want to get into too much more detail, but I appreciate the comment and the inquiry on it.
Yeah, it just, you know, when you get to the end of the zone B, you don't know what your price is to the next zone until the last minute.
Well, that's going to be displayed before you hit the beginning of segment of that segment 3. That price will be displayed before you get there, because there is going to be a need for drivers to make that decision point, make a decision there before continuing on to part C. I think I want to make sure that I'm understanding. Are you saying that price to point C should be displayed throughout that segment 2? Or are you saying it needs to be displayed before you hit segment 3?
Well, it's only displayed right at the boundary of B and C. And you're not necessarily getting told there, but the customer doesn't know that. Once they see the price, they assume that's where the zone starts.
Yeah, there's usually a price sign. I don't know, maybe I don't want to give precise distances, but at least a half a mile probably before segment 3 starts, you would see the price to the zone 2 price. You would see it, you know, but you'd still be technically in segment 2 when you'd see pricing for zone 2. But I don't think that's what I think you recognize that and you're saying, why can't we put the C price even?
Yeah, because once they see that price, that's the first time they see it, and they assume they are entering into the zone C. So that's their decision point right there. They don't see any upstream sign before that, so they can either get out or decide to stay in. They need to make that. They need to make that decision right at that sign.
I know exactly what you're saying. I had some extra slides that if we were going to get into the weeds of why we cut off pricing at the end of a zone and kind of walks through the math and stuff. I don't think we have. We're already at 11:35 here. I don't know that I have time to get into that.
Yeah, I've been through all that. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I understand that.
If we have the sign, if we have the capability, what's the harm of showing the second or the third segment's toll at the end of B, or as part of what you see for B?
Well, I think, Sean, it goes back to that the issue of price locking and the fact that zone 2 is intended to be managed independently. So if you're locking people into prices in zone 2 back in zone 1, it's going to impede the operator's ability to effectively use pricing to manage zone 2.
Well, you know, first of all, you know, we can decide how many people would be in that situation going from B into the C, and then the price can be controlled by the toll for people entering into C after they pass B. Again, revenue generation shouldn't be the primary reason for you know, displaying signs.
Yeah, I could. There's no component of like the zone pricing model that's driven by revenue. Like the decision or not displaying the next zone's price in the first zone is not driven by.
It may not be driven by that, John, but it may be implicitly, you know, happening because of it, right? I mean, certainly, you know, I don't think that's the intent to generate revenue necessarily, but I mean, in terms of consistency of signage, in terms of uniformity, I think drivers, just like they see their next 3 interchanges on a highway sign, you know, they get the distance, they should get the price for at least the next 2. Because that's going to help drive their decision prices, the process. You know, it makes it easier for them to anticipate, have more time to react. I just think we really need to think about these things and not necessarily put, pricing and congestion management above safety and uniformity. Thanks again.
I have, you got time, I got a couple more questions. Can you go back to the slide that just showed the zone 1?
Was it this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somewhat what we're seeing is that if this exit to destination 1, where you have your sign here, we're seeing some of the operators wanting to put destination to like the next zone or destination 2 and 3 on that sign upstream of the exit to the destination 1. And kind of what they're telling us is that, well, if we're only going to destination 1, you'd already be out of the lane by then because you need to weave over to get to the exit. However, not everybody wants to pay to destination 2, depending on the price, but they might still continue on the freeway if it's northbound. They might still want to continue on to the freeway northbound, but they've already paid to the price to the destination 1. But once they see the sign that says destination 2 pricing here and the toll gantry before that exit, they're going to feel like they need to get out prior to that exit. And kind of feel like they haven't got their full use of that zone or that segment. So I just want to know your take on that.
Are you imagining this is like a continue? Yeah, I guess I kind of skirted that issue by making this sort of a restricted access where it's very clear cut that, if they want to go to destination 1, they get out here. Are you, Lance, talking about a situation where it's a continuous access and you're saying that they feel they have to get out much sooner than destination 1 to actually access it? And so they're feeling maybe like.
Well, no, it would, so, like they're saying that the word of pricing signs placed is that they would already decide to get out there if they were going to exit at destination 1 at the off ramp. But the issue is not everybody necessarily wants to exit at destination 1. They might just not want to pay the price of destination 2. So they would exit the express lane, but continue on the freeway. So they wouldn't necessarily need to get out that far upstream. And they've paid to destination 1, so they would want to take it all the way to the end of that zone.
Yeah, it seems like a very particular example of continuous access. Maybe it speaks. There's a lot about continuous access specifics that probably could benefit from some more conversations. Or
John, it really gets to sort of the fundamentals of why we manage lanes this way, so that way drivers make a decision on whether or not they want to, use the express lane to get a certain amount of value for a certain distance traveled, and they'll make the decision based on the nature of the trips and the prevailing congestion and the price on exactly how far they want to travel in the lanes and if they want to get out and use the general purpose lanes at some point.
Well, what we suggest is that the toll pricing sign and the toll gantry be placed downstream of the exit. So they get the full use of the zone, whether they're they're getting out at that exit or whether they just don't want to pay the price to the next toll zone.
I think I'm kind of following you, Lance, but I probably would have to like sit down with this particular example and think about what it is you're saying. I mean, in continuous access, we have toll readers spaced, depending on the facility, 1 mile to 1.5 miles apart. So before and downstream of a particular destination.
Yeah, it's an issue where they're signing the next zone upstream of the end of the previous zone.
I think what he's trying to say is on the sign, let people know where zone 1 ends. So if they want to get out to the general purpose lane, they can if they don't want to pay the next price in the next zone. Let them know ahead of time where zone 1 ends.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the idea is that the desk in this example, you know, zone 1, well, I guess where it ends is,
John, that is typically what we have on the signs. We typically have a geographic location or an exit or something like that listed. I guess
see.
it sounds to me like we're getting hung up on this particular exhibit, and this is just to illustrate one point. I think you had a subsequent slide, John, that had multiple destinations on the same sign, which is more of what we do in reality. So that way, if the driver is continuing a longer distance on this stretch, he may see a sign that has a further destination point, unless it's the division of a zone. And then there would be another set of signs on the approach to that exit that would allow the driver to make that decision. But we certainly look to serve. We certainly look to serve all of the possible combinations of entrances and exits with, you know, the information necessary for the driver to make that decision.
Yeah, because usually a zone is made up of at least a couple segments, right? Not just one segment. So this slide doesn't really show a zone.
Yeah,
It
you're right.
doesn't have
This
the
is not a
price
zone.
for the zone. But I think the price for the zone should be put up there, you know, so that they know when they can get out and not have to pay the next zone price.
We've had some discussions about whether or not to mark the end of a zone. I have looked at this situation, how it's handled in different places across the country. My observation has been that in most cases, the only thing that you'll see is just a new set of pricing signs, no indication that a new zone is beginning. There is one state that I know that has that practice. We've not made a decision on this one way or another for California. And it sounds like there are some people who are pushing that that's something that we should do. And we can certainly look into that as we continue to refine our guidance, you know, in terms of signing practices for price managed lanes. So we can definitely revisit that. You know, I think at a more of a working group type level within the managed lane working group, there are some ideas that I have seen which we could apply. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. As has been noted, we are over a bit, and it looks like a good majority of people have stuck around. Thank you. I hope that you found this beneficial. I do not see, John, any further hands up. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up for today. I definitely get the sense that we need to do more of these. I know some of you are aware that I am starting to transition into a new role for the department as our statewide lead for toll operations, and I'm going to be kind of shifting my day-to-day assignments with managed lanes. I'm going to be handing that off to some other folks within the Division of Traffic Operations. As I was chatting with Darren in the chat here during this workshop, and I mentioned to him I'm seeing a need as I take on that new role. I think education and putting these types of sessions together to bring our people more up to, you know, bring them more, have them become more familiar with the tolling, in general, and some of these topics, you know, having more detailed discussions. I think that that's going to be probably a high priority for me as I start to transition to that role. I know my boss is on here, so Zongren, that's something I would love to discuss with you further, you know, as I start to transition into this new assignment. But I see a very big need for that. But I do think for the time being, we should plan on having one of these workshops that's going to focus, I think, on some of these project delivery issues that were generating a lot of questions at the outset. I again apologize that I didn't make it clear that we were focusing today on the operational piece and not necessarily the project development piece, but I see a real need for that, and I want to see if we can get back together and hopefully address some of the questions that you might have. So with that thought in mind, I would ask you, those of you who are here today from within Caltrans, if there's something that you would like to have covered in more detail in terms of how do you get a price managed lane project off the ground? What is the role of the system integrator? Addressing those discrepancies and issues that some of you I know are seeing between the system integrator, the general contractor, and the hindrances that some of those things are creating in terms of getting some of these projects off the ground. I'd like to hear from you in terms of what you would like to have discussed. So send those questions on to me, and we'll start to compile those, and I'll see if we can set up another one of these sessions to discuss that. Whether we'll have a single presenter such as John, or whether we'll do it in more of a roundtable and have more folks from the industry to speak on that. I'll kind of make that decision, I think, here once I start to see some of the questions that you all might have. But I definitely want to have another one of these, I think, to focus on that. And then if we want to do something more down the road, we'll just kind of see where that goes. But I think the educational component, I'm seeing a great need for it. And that's what I was hoping to do today, at least get a start on it, get some of these basic ideas out there. But I see that there's more of the work that can be done. And so we're going to make that a point, I think, going forward. So again, John, I want to thank you for the effort that you made in putting this together. I think it was well done, and I hope that our staff was able to receive some help from it. The comments I'm seeing in the chat, it seems like it's been very well received. So thank you very much. And looking forward to doing this again down the road. We'll see who all we're going to bring into the discussion. And I want to thank again those of you from the consulting world who joined us today, and for your comments and for your support in terms of answering the questions in the chat, in responding to the questions that were raised here during the webinar. I very much appreciate it. That's why I wanted you to be here, and I'm glad that you were able to help contribute that way. And I'm looking forward to bringing you all back as well to hopefully help aid in some further discussions. So with that, again, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining us. Please send your comments. Please send me your thoughts, ideas, suggestions for what we can do in the future, because I want to keep this going. Like I said, I see a real need for this. I think it's very important that our people become familiar with these concepts and these ideas. And that way we can also help our local partners as they work to lead some of these projects, because right now, politically, financially, that's the way it's going. We have regional agencies that are really taking the lead on getting these projects off the ground. But I want to make sure that we have the knowledge to be able to help them in terms of what they're trying to do, and that we can build that stronger partnership with them to help get these projects moving and move forward that way. So that's my goal here, and looking forward to helping to achieve that. So again, thank you all. Enjoy your weekend, and we will be in touch with you soon. We will share this video with you, the recording of this presentation, and we'll also share the PowerPoint once I've had an opportunity to package everything together. So once again, thank you, and appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.